10 silver, says the Alpha King, finally lost his mind. The laughter rolled through the underground auction hall just as the auctioneer yanked the black hood lower over the girl's face. "Look at her," someone called from the upper balcony. "He bought the ugly one." More laughter followed, rough and careless, echoing off the damp stone walls beneath Valebrook City. The air smelled of wet iron, old smoke, and expensive perfume trying to hide the stink of desperation. Rows of nobles leaned forward in velvet chairs carved from dark oak, their jeweled fingers wrapped around crystal glasses, while chained omegas stood below them beneath torchlight like livestock waiting for slaughter. At the center platform, the hooded girl did not move. Thin silver restraints circled her pale wrists. Rainwater still dripped from the edge of her cloak onto the black stone floor, leaving tiny dark spots beneath her boots. "Next lot," the auctioneer announced loudly, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "Female Omega, 22 years old, unmarked, scarred, unclaimed." A low murmur spread instantly. Scarred. The word moved through the crowd faster than wildfire through dry grass. One noblewoman wrinkled her nose. Another covered her mouth to hide a smile. "Take the hood off," a man shouted from the back. "Let us see what scared every pack away." The auctioneer hesitated only a second before gripping the fabric near the girl's shoulder. She flinched. Small, fast, barely noticeable, but the movement still caught someone's attention. Heavy doors groaned open at the far end of the hall. Every voice died at once. Even the torches seemed to quiet. Alpha King Cale Thorne remained framed beneath the archway for one long second, his black coat still wet from the storm outside. Rain glimmered across the broad line of his shoulders before dripping soundlessly onto the stone beneath him. 2 royal guards followed several steps behind, but no one looked at them. The room belonged entirely to him the moment he entered it. He walked slowly through the auction hall, silver eyes unreadable beneath the flickering torchlight. Nobles lowered their heads as he passed. A few stood too quickly, knocking glasses sideways across their tables. Nobody expected the Alpha King to appear in the black market himself. Not tonight, not for this. "Your Majesty," the auctioneer stammered, immediately releasing the girl's hood. "We prepared a private selection upstairs if you wish." "No." Kyle's voice was calm, deep, controlled enough to make the silence around it heavier. His gaze settled on the hooded Omega, not the noblewomen in silk, not the prized daughters displayed near the front. Her. The girl kept her head lowered, though her breathing had changed, slightly uneven now. The king stopped directly in front of the platform. For a moment, nobody spoke. A torch cracked loudly somewhere near the ceiling. One of the nobles laughed nervously under his breath, waiting for the king to move on. Kyle didn't. His eyes lingered on the silver restraint cutting into the girl's wrist. Then slowly, almost thoughtfully, he tilted his head. The auctioneer forced another laugh. "A damaged Omega, Your Majesty. Hardly worth your time. We only kept the hood because the last buyer complained after seeing her face." Several people chuckled again, softer this time, testing the room carefully. The girl's fingers curled tighter into the fabric of her cloak. Cale noticed. His expression did not change, but something in the air around him sharpened anyway. One of the king's guards shifted uneasily behind him. "What's her name?" Cale asked. The auctioneer blinked. We were not given one, sire." A pause followed, brief, strange. The Alpha King looked at the hooded girl one more time, and for the first time since entering the hall, something almost imperceptible slowed in his expression. Not softness, worse, interest. Then he reached into his coat, removed a black obsidian token bearing the royal crest, and dropped it onto the auction block with a sharp crack against the stone. Gasps rippled instantly through the chamber. The royal seal, enough to purchase every Omega in the room 10 times over. "I'll take this one," the Alpha King said, and somewhere in the crowded darkness above the auction floor, somebody whispered, almost afraid now, "God, he hasn't even seen her face." The laughter did not return all at once. It crept back carefully after the Alpha King turned away from the auction block, low murmurs spreading through the hall like smoke, searching for cracks in a wall. He can't be serious. Maybe she's some hidden healer. Or maybe the king finally got tired of pretty faces. Kale ignored every word as he walked toward the exit, the hooded Omega following 3 steps behind him under guard escort. Her chains had been removed, but the red marks remained around her pale wrists, stark beneath the torchlight whenever her sleeves shifted. She kept her head lowered as they crossed the chamber. Not weak, just careful. The nobles watched her the way wolves watched a limping deer near winter. Curious, cruel, waiting for something entertaining to happen. Near the upper balcony, Lady Varel leaned lazily against the railing, silver jewels glittering against her dark blue gown. She smiled as the king approached below. "Your Majesty," she called smoothly, "surely the black market didn't offer you better company than the royal court tonight." Several nearby nobles snorted quietly. Kale did not stop walking. Varel's smile tightened. "Unless," she added louder, "you bought her for charity." A few people laughed again. The Omega's shoulders drew inward beneath the cloak. Small movement, quick. But Kale noticed that too. His pace slowed by half a step, barely enough for anyone else to catch. Rain thundered faintly above the stone ceiling, while the underground torches hissed and flickered in damp air. The king finally stopped near the central stairwell. Silence spread instantly again. He turned just enough for his silver gaze to rise toward the balcony. "Do you often mistake silence for weakness, Lady Varel?" His voice stayed calm. That somehow made it worse. Varel's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she laughed lightly and lifted her wineglass. "Not weakness, sire. Mystery." Kale held her gaze another moment, long enough for the noblewoman to slowly lower the glass without realizing she'd done it. Then he continued walking. Behind him, whispers exploded across the chamber. "Did you see that? He defended her." "No, he warned Varel. Over a hooded Omega?" The girl heard all of it. Kale could tell by the slight tension gathering in her hands beneath the cloak. Her fingers curled tighter each time laughter rose behind them. At the foot of the stairwell, one of the younger nobles stepped directly into their path. Drunk, reckless enough not to understand danger until it reached his throat. "Your Majesty," the man slurred with a crooked grin, "at least tell us if she bites before we all lose our wagers." More laughter burst out, louder now. The Omega froze. Not from fear alone. Kale saw her attention flick briefly toward the exits, measuring distance, instinct, like someone used to escaping before crowds turned cruel. The young noble reached toward the edge of her hood. "Come on," he said. "Let the room see what—" Steel rang softly from somewhere behind the king. One of the royal guards had instinctively moved a hand to his sword. Kale lifted 2 fingers without even turning around. The guard stopped immediately. But the room had already gone still. Slowly, Kale faced the noble blocking their path. "Move," he said quietly. The drunk noble swallowed. His grin twitched uncertainly. "I was only joking." "Then find a better one." The words landed softly, cleanly, somehow more humiliating than shouting. Heat crept visibly into the noble's face as he stepped aside. No one laughed this time. Kale resumed walking, but the atmosphere behind him had changed. The mockery remained, though thinner now, more cautious, like the room had finally sensed teeth beneath the calm. Halfway up the staircase, the Omega stumbled when her boot caught the wet edge of a stone step. A sharp breath escaped somewhere in the crowd. Kyle's hand closed around her forearm before she could fall. Fast, effortless. The entire staircase froze. Even the guards looked surprised. For one suspended second, the king's black-gloved hand remained against her pale skin beneath the cloak sleeve. The Omega looked up slightly beneath the hood, just enough for him to catch the faint outline of her mouth. Not frightened now, confused. Kyle released her immediately. Too immediately. His jaw tightened once before he continued upward without another word. But below them, among the watching nobles, unease had already begun replacing amusement. The storm above Blackthorn Citadel grew louder by the minute. Thunder rolled across the mountains as Cale crossed the outer bridge with the hooded Omega walking beside him, 4 royal guards trailing several feet behind in uneasy silence. Wind tore through the stone arches, snapping black banners hard enough to sound like cracking whips in the dark. Below the bridge, waves crashed against the cliffs hundreds of feet beneath them. The Omega kept one hand pressed against her hood as the storm pulled at the fabric. Not once did she complain. Not once did she ask where they were taking her. That unsettled the guards more than fear would have. "She hasn't spoken a single word," one muttered quietly behind them. "Maybe she can't. Or maybe she's smarter than all of us." Cale heard both comments. His expression never changed. Halfway across the bridge, lightning split the sky bright enough to bleach the world silver for an instant. The Omega froze mid-step. Cale stopped immediately beside her. Another crack of thunder followed, closer this time. The girl's breathing shifted beneath the hood. Faster now. Her fingers tightened against the cloak near her throat. Cale's gaze flicked once toward the sky, then toward her. "Keep moving," he said quietly. Not cold, not harsh either. Something steadier. The wind screamed through the bridge again. She nodded once and continued forward. Behind them, Captain Reese frowned slightly at the exchange. He had served the Alpha King for 11 years. He had seen Kyle negotiate wars without blinking, sentence traitors with less emotion than most men showed while pouring wine. But tonight, the king kept adjusting his pace for a stranger no one else in the kingdom would have looked at twice. That bothered him. Ahead, the massive gates of Blackthorn Citadel groaned open. Warm torchlight spilled across the rain-dark stone courtyard, while servants hurried under covered walkways trying to avoid the storm. The moment Kyle entered, activity slowed across the entire fortress. Eyes followed them instantly. Stable boys stopped carrying grain sacks. Maids paused near the fountain. 2 older nobles standing beneath an archway visibly stiffened when they noticed the hooded figure walking at the king's side. "That's her?" one whispered. "From the auction?" "Gods, he actually brought her here." The Omega lowered her head further as the murmurs spread through the courtyard. Cale noticed the movement before anyone else did. His jaw tightened slightly. Then a sharp screech shattered the moment overhead. Several servants startled as a massive black raven dropped from the storm and landed hard against one of the courtyard statues, wings beating rainwater everywhere. The bird stared directly at the hooded girl. Still, watching. One servant crossed herself nervously. "Bad omen," somebody whispered. The Omega looked up beneath the hood for the first time since entering the citadel. Just slightly. The raven tilted its head once toward her, then launched back into the storm. Silence lingered after it disappeared. Strange silence. Cale's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly before he resumed walking. Inside the citadel, warmth replaced rain, but the tension only sharpened. Blackthorn's great hall stretched endlessly beneath vaulted ceilings lined with iron chandeliers and burning blue fire lanterns. Every step echoed against polished stone. Courtiers gathered near the far staircase immediately straightened at the king's arrival. Their attention shifted toward the hooded Omega almost instantly. Cale did not slow down. "Prepare the West Wing," he ordered a servant. The young man blinked in surprise. "The West Wing, sire?" Several nearby nobles exchanged startled glances. Nobody stayed in the West Wing except honored guests and royal blood. Cale stopped walking. Slowly, the servant paled beneath the king's gaze. "Is there a problem?" "No, your majesty." The servant nearly stumbled over himself before rushing away. The whispers erupted again the second he left. The West Wing? For her? Why? The Omega's steps faltered slightly this time, not from fear, from confusion. Cale saw it in the subtle turn of her head toward him beneath the hood. Before either of them could continue, another interruption cut sharply through the hall. "Absolutely not." Queen Mother Selena stood at the top of the staircase in silver robes, one hand gripping the railing hard enough for her knuckles to pale. Her cold gray eyes locked immediately onto the hooded Omega. then to her son. "Tell me," she said slowly, voice echoing across the hall, "that you did not bring black market filth into my home." Around them, every servant in the great hall stopped breathing. No one in Blackthorn Citadel spoke before Queen Mother Celine did. Even the fire lanterns seemed to dim beneath the weight of her voice. "Remove the hood," she ordered coldly from the staircase. The Omega stiffened instantly. Not dramatic, just enough for the movement to ripple through the hall like a dropped pin in still water. Kale remained at the center of the chamber, rainwater still darkening the shoulders of his black coat. For one long moment he said nothing. That alone unsettled everyone watching. The Alpha King was not a man known for hesitation. Celine descended the staircase slowly, silver fabric whispering against the stone steps beneath her. Every noble in the hall lowered their eyes as she passed. Unlike her son, the Queen Mother carried power openly, sharply, like a blade everyone knew better than to touch. Her pale gaze swept over the hooded Omega with visible disgust before returning to Kale. "You brought an unidentified Omega from the black market into royal territory during council season." Her tone stayed calm, but one vein near her wrist pulsed visibly beneath her skin. "Explain yourself." Kale finally removed his gloves finger by finger, deliberate, unhurried. "She is under my protection." A murmur spread instantly through the hall. Not ownership, not servant status. Protection. Even Celine paused at the wording. Tiny crack, barely there. Then her expression hardened again. "Protection?" she repeated. "From whom?" No one answered. Somewhere near the side corridor, a servant carrying a silver tray moved too quickly and dropped a goblet onto the marble floor. The sharp clang shattered the silence. Several nobles jumped. The servant turned pale and immediately dropped to his knees apologizing, but nobody looked at him for long. All attention remained fixed on the king and his mother. Selene stopped 3 steps away from the Omega, close enough now to study the girl beneath the hood. "Lift your head," she commanded. The Omega obeyed slowly. Even hidden beneath shadow, the lower half of her face looked pale from exhaustion. Rain still clung to loose strands of light hair near her throat. Selene's eyes narrowed slightly. "What pack are you from?" Silence. The Omega's fingers tightened once beneath the cloak. Kael noticed immediately. "She's tired," he said, before the girl could respond. Another subtle shift moved through the room. Surprise this time. The Queen Mother looked at her son carefully now, as though seeing something unfamiliar standing in front of her. "You answer for her now?" Kael did not reply immediately. That was the second crack. Small, dangerous. He glanced once toward the Omega before speaking again. "I answer for what concerns this court." Selena studied him another second too long. Then suddenly, without warning, she reached toward the edge of the Omega's hood herself. Gasps broke across the chamber. The girl recoiled instinctively backward, fast enough for the movement to look practiced. Fear learned through repetition. Kael moved at the exact same moment. His hand caught his mother's wrist before the fabric could be pulled away. The entire hall froze. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. Selena slowly looked down at her son's hand around her wrist. Not tight, but firm enough to stop her. Shock flickered across several noble faces nearby. Captain Reese looked like he'd forgotten how to blink. Kael released her immediately. Too late. The moment had already happened. "Enough," he said quietly. Selena's expression became perfectly still, somehow colder than anger. "You shame this throne for a nameless Omega?" The words landed hard across the hall. The Omega lowered her head again beneath the hood, shoulders drawing inward as whispers reignited around the chamber. Nameless. Probably stolen from some border pit. Maybe she's diseased. Kael heard every word. His gaze shifted slowly toward the crowd. The whispers thinned at once. But not entirely. One older council lord stepped forward cautiously near the fire lanterns. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "for the safety of the court, perhaps the girl should remain hidden until proper inspection." The Omega went completely still beside Kael. Not fear this time, resignation, like she had heard the sentence before it was spoken. Kael's jaw flexed once, tiny movement. Then his eyes lowered briefly toward the faint red marks still circling her wrists. Too brief for most people to notice. Not brief enough. "No," he said at last. Quiet again. Final again. But this time, slower. The West Wing had not been occupied in nearly 3 years. Dust lingered faintly beneath the scent of cedarwood fires as servants hurried through the corridor, relighting lanterns and changing linens before the king arrived. Their movements stayed quick and nervous. Nobody spoke louder than a whisper. Every few seconds, someone glanced toward the hooded Omega walking beside Kael, as if expecting her to vanish if they looked too long. The storm outside softened into steady rain by the time they reached the chamber doors. Warm gold light spilled across polished floors and tall windows overlooking the cliffs below Blackthorn Citadel. The Omega stopped just inside the doorway. Her breathing slowed slightly for the first time all night. Not relief exactly, more like disbelief. The room was enormous compared to the underground cell she had likely expected. A fire burned steadily near a carved stone hearth. Fresh blankets waited folded neatly at the foot of a bed large enough for nobility. Even the silver wash basin beside the window steamed faintly with heated water. Kael watched her take it in beneath the hood, quietly, carefully, like someone entering a trap disguised as kindness. "You will stay here," he said. She gave a small nod without looking directly at him. One servant stepped forward, carrying folded gowns over both arms. "For the lady," the woman murmured softly, before setting them carefully near the bed. The Omega flinched almost imperceptibly at the word lady. Kael noticed that too. He noticed everything about her reactions now. That unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Captain Reese lingered near the doorway after the servants withdrew. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the council will not remain silent about this." Kael removed his damp coat slowly, eyes still resting on the hooded girl near the window. "They rarely do," Reese hesitated. "And the Queen Mother?" A brief pause followed. Kael's fingers stopped at the silver clasp near his sleeve for half a second too long before continuing. "I'll deal with my mother." The answer sounded controlled, but not certain. Reese caught it immediately. So did the Omega, judging by the slight turn of her head beneath the hood. The captain finally bowed and left, shutting the doors behind him with a heavy thud that echoed through the chamber. Silence settled afterward, softer now, the kind that arrives after storms instead of before them. Kael crossed toward the fire while the Omega remained near the window overlooking the cliffs. Rain streaked faintly across the glass behind her. Neither spoke for several moments. Then, unexpectedly, her stomach growled. Quiet, mortifyingly human. She froze beneath the hood. Kael blinked once. The corner of his mouth almost moved before he looked away toward the fire instead. "You haven't eaten." It was not a question. She shook her head slightly. Kael reached for the tray servants had left untouched near the hearth and carried it toward her himself. Fresh bread, roasted pheasant, warm broth still steaming beneath silver lids. The Omega stared at the food without moving. "It isn't poisoned," Kael said dryly. Another pause. Slowly, cautiously, she reached for the bread with pale fingers emerging from the cloak sleeve. Tiny scars marked the skin near her knuckles. Old scars, faded silver beneath the firelight. Kael's gaze lingered there longer than it should have. She noticed. Her hand immediately withdrew back beneath the cloak. Distance returned between them instantly. The fragile calm cracked a little. Kael set the tray down carefully on the nearby table instead. "No one here will harm you." The words filled the room quietly. Too quietly, because part of him no longer fully believed them himself. The Omega remained motionless beside the tray. Then finally, very softly, she spoke for the first time. That's what they said before. Kael's eyes lifted sharply toward her. Her voice was lower than he expected. tired, careful around the edges, like something unused for a long time. Before he could answer, sudden shouting erupted somewhere deep below the West Wing corridor. Fast footsteps followed. A servant rushed past the chamber doors outside. Then another voice echoed sharply through the hall. "Search the lower gates again!" The Omega stiffened instantly. The bread slipped from her fingers back onto the tray. Kale turned toward the doors at the same moment she took one instinctive step backward toward the window. Not away from the noise, away from him. The shouting outside the West Wing grew louder. Boots pounded across stone floors below the chamber, while distant voices echoed through the corridor in sharp, overlapping bursts. "Seal the north passage! Search every servant entrance!" The Omega stepped back again when another yell rang through the hall. Instinct, immediate. Her shoulder brushed the cold window behind her, as though she'd already measured whether the glass could break if she needed it to. Kale watched the movement carefully. Not panic, preparation. That changed something in his expression. The chamber doors suddenly swung open hard enough to strike the wall. Captain Reese entered first, Rain still clinging to his armor despite the covered corridors below. 2 additional guards followed behind him, tense and breathing heavily. "Your Majesty?" Reese stopped abruptly after noticing how close the Omega stood to the window. "We found 3 men near the lower gate carrying forged royal seals." Kale's posture sharpened instantly. "Who sent them?" "They refused to answer," Reese hesitated, "but they were asking for a hooded Omega purchased tonight at the black market." Silence hit the chamber like a blade dragged slowly across stone. The Omega's breathing stopped for one suspended second. Kale noticed before anyone else did. His eyes shifted toward her. She looked smaller suddenly beneath the cloak, but not weaker. Cornered animals did not always break. Sometimes they watched exits. "Leave us," Kale ordered quietly. Reese frowned. "Sire, now." The captain obeyed after only the briefest pause, though concern lingered visibly across his face as the guards withdrew and shut the doors again. The moment the locks clicked into place, the Omega moved. Fast. She crossed toward the opposite side of the chamber before Kale could speak, one hand gripping the edge of the cloak near her throat so tightly her knuckles blanched pale beneath the firelight. "Who are they?" Kale asked. She shook her head immediately, too quickly. "I don't know." Lie, not a skilled one either. Kale stepped closer, slow enough not to corner her. "Someone crossed royal borders during a storm to reach this citadel tonight." His voice stayed calm, but the room itself no longer felt calm around him. People do not risk that for a nameless Omega. Her eyes remained hidden beneath the hood. "I said I don't know." Kale stopped 3 feet away from her. The fire cracked loudly behind him. Outside, thunder rolled again over the cliffs. "Look at me." She didn't. Instead, her shoulders tightened beneath the cloak, and for the first time since he'd seen her in the auction hall, actual anger flickered through the fear. Small, sharp. "Why?" she whispered. "So you can decide I'm dangerous too?" The question landed harder than he expected. Kale's jaw shifted slightly. Tiny crack. Then the Omega laughed once under her breath. Bitter. Exhausted. That's usually the part where people change their minds. Another shout echoed faintly outside the corridor below. The noise made her flinch again, despite herself. Kale saw it, saw the exhaustion in the way she held her weight unevenly near the window, saw how her fingers never fully relaxed from the cloak around her throat. And suddenly, something in him snapped quietly into place. Not softness, decision. He crossed the remaining distance between them before she could retreat again. Not aggressively, but directly enough that her back touched the stone wall beside the window. Her breath caught beneath the hood. Kale reached toward the edge of the black fabric slowly this time, giving her every chance to stop him. She grabbed his wrist instantly, warm fingers against cold skin. The contact froze both of them. Her grip trembled slightly. Not weak, just strained beyond exhaustion. "Don't," she said, barely audible. Kale looked down at her hand around his wrist, then back toward the hidden face beneath the hood. "Someone is hunting you," he said quietly. inside my kingdom." His voice lowered further, dangerous now in a different way. "That makes this my problem." Another pause stretched between them. Rain streaked down the tall window beside her, while thunder rolled over Blackthorn Citadel like distant war drums. The Omega slowly released his wrist. Her hand dropped back beneath the cloak, but she still did not lift the hood. Cale studied her one long second more before stepping back half a pace, not retreating, giving space, choice. "Fine," he said at last, calm again. Controlled again. "Keep your secrets." Then his silver eyes hardened toward the locked chamber doors. "But if anyone in this citadel touches you without my permission—" A brief silence followed, sharp enough to cut. "They answer to me." By midnight, everyone in Blackthorn Citadel knew about the hooded Omega in the West Wing. Servants carried the story through kitchens and corridors in frightened whispers, while guards repeated pieces of it beside torchlit stairwells. The Alpha King brought her from the black market himself. He stopped the Queen Mother from touching her. Armed men crossed the borders searching for her before dawn. With every retelling, the story grew stranger, more dangerous, and somewhere beneath all of it lingered the same question no one could answer. Who was she? Rain hammered the citadel windows through the night, while the fortress slowly tightened around itself like a fist. Extra guards appeared along the lower halls. Courtyard gates slammed shut, one after another. Chains rattled. Orders echoed. Sleep became impossible inside Blackthorn. In the West Wing chamber, the Omega sat near the fire without touching the food again. Her hood remained up. The flames painted soft gold across the dark fabric, while thunder rolled beyond the cliffs outside. Cale stood near the far window, reading reports delivered every half hour by increasingly nervous guards. 3 intruders captured near the lower gates, 1 servant missing from the eastern kitchens, 2 horses stolen from the outer stables before midnight. Nothing connected cleanly. That bothered him most. "Your Majesty." Captain Reese entered again, visibly tense now. Another raven arrived. Cale looked up immediately. "From where?" No markings. Reese handed over a rain-soaked strip of black cloth wrapped around a small silver ring. The moment Cale opened it, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. One line written in dark ink stretched across the fabric. "She does not belong to your throne." The Omega went completely still near the fire. Not dramatic, but every tiny movement in her body stopped at once. Cale noticed before Reese did. Slowly, his eyes lifted from the message toward the hooded figure across the room. "Leave us," he ordered again. Reese hesitated harder this time. "Sire, with respect, this is escalating beyond leave." The captain obeyed reluctantly, though his gaze lingered on the Omega before the doors shut behind him. Silence settled heavily after that. Rain hissed against the windows. Firewood cracked softly in the hearth. Cale folded the cloth once in his hand. "You recognize the message?" The Omega stared into the fire without answering. "Who are they?" Cale asked again. This time she rose slowly from the chair. The movement looked fragile at first, until she straightened fully beneath the cloak. Then something shifted. Not confidence exactly, but exhaustion reaching its limit. "You should let them take me," she said quietly. Cale's expression darkened instantly. "No. You don't know what this is. Then tell me." She shook her head once. "You won't believe it." Cale stepped closer. "Try me." The Omega turned toward the window instead of answering. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her silhouette against the rain-streaked glass. For one brief second, Cale caught the outline beneath the hood more clearly than before. Slim, pale, and along the edge of her throat, the faint curve of something that looked less like a scar and more like a symbol burned into skin. Another knock exploded against the chamber doors before he could look closer. Hard this time. Urgent. "Your Majesty," a guard shouted from outside. "There's been an incident in the lower hall." Cale opened the doors immediately. Chaos greeted him. Servants crowded the corridor, whispering over one another, while guards rushed toward the main staircase below. Somewhere deeper in the citadel, glass shattered loudly enough to echo through the stone halls. "What happened?" Cale demanded. One young guard swallowed hard before answering. "The prisoners from the lower gate." He looked shaken. "They're dead, sire." Silence hit the corridor. Even the servants stopped whispering. Cale's eyes narrowed dangerously. "How?" We don't know." The guard's face had gone pale beneath the torchlight. No wounds, no signs of struggle. They were alive minutes earlier. Another crash sounded below, then shouting. Fast footsteps thundered through the lower corridor as more guards flooded the stairwell. Fear spread visibly now. Real fear. Not gossip anymore. Not curiosity. The kind that infects entire rooms faster than fire. Behind Cale, the Omega stepped silently into the doorway of the West Wing chamber. Several servants noticed her at once and immediately backed away. One woman made the sign against curses beneath her breath. Another dropped the tray she'd been carrying. Plates shattered across the floor. Nobody picked them up. Kyle turned toward the Omega again just as lightning flashed through the windows behind her. And for the first time since bringing her into Blackthorn Citadel, he realized the court was no longer asking whether she was dangerous. They were beginning to fear that she might be. The lower halls of Blackthorn Citadel dissolved into panic before dawn. Guards flooded the corridors with drawn steel, while servants huddled against walls, whispering prayers beneath their breath. Every torch seemed to burn lower than usual. Every shadow looked wrong. Kyle descended the main staircase toward the prison level with Captain Reese beside him, boots striking hard against black stone. The Omega followed several steps behind, despite the protests around her. "She shouldn't be here. Keep her upstairs. Your Majesty, please." Kyle ignored every voice except the sound of her footsteps behind him. Light, uneven, but steady. The deeper they moved into the citadel, the colder the air became. Prison guards stood waiting outside the lower cells, visibly shaken. One man still clutched a ring of keys hard enough for his hands to tremble. Another refused to look directly at the Omega beneath the hood. "Open it," Kyle ordered. The cell door creaked inward slowly. Silence poured out first. Thick. Wrong. 3 bodies remained exactly where the guards claimed they'd fallen. No blood, no struggle. Just wide eyes staring toward the ceiling as though they had seen something moments before death reached them. Reese swore quietly under his breath. Cale crouched near the nearest prisoner, silver eyes narrowing at the thin black veins spread beneath the dead man's skin near his throat. Recognition flashed across his face instantly. Tiny crack, but real. The Omega stopped several feet behind him. Her breathing changed the moment she saw the bodies. "No," she whispered. Cale looked up sharply. "You know this." The hooded girl backed away once, then again. Panic moved through the corridor instantly. Guards shifted uneasily. One servant near the stairwell began crying softly. "Send her away," someone whispered. "Gods, she brought this here." The Omega closed her eyes briefly beneath the hood as though the voices physically hurt. Cale stood slowly. "What did they die from?" Reese asked quietly. Cale did not answer immediately. Another dangerous pause. "Shadow rot," he said at last. Half the corridor recoiled at the words alone. One guard nearly dropped his weapon. Shadow rot. The curse wiped from the Northern Territories nearly 20 years ago. The disease tied to one bloodline everyone believed extinct. Silence collapsed over the prison level. Then suddenly the Omega turned and ran. Fast, cloak snapping behind her as she disappeared up the staircase toward the upper halls. "Stop her!" one guard shouted instinctively. Cale moved before the order fully left the man's mouth. "No one touches her." His voice hit the corridor like thunder. The entire fortress froze around it. Then Cale was already moving up the stairs after her. Servants scattered from his path, guards flattened against walls. Somewhere above, another window shattered from the storm winds slamming through the upper corridors. He found her at the end of the western gallery, near the cathedral windows overlooking the sea cliffs. Dawn had begun bleeding faint silver into the horizon beyond the rain. The Omega stood trembling near the broken glass while freezing wind tore through the corridor, dragging her cloak violently around her body. Kale slowed as he approached. "Look at me." She shook her head immediately. "You should have left me there." Her voice cracked for the first time. "At the auction." Kale stopped only a few feet away now. "Who are you?" Silence. Wind screamed through the broken windows. Somewhere far below, waves crashed violently against the cliffs. Then finally, very slowly, she lifted shaking fingers toward the hood. "If I show you," her breathing faltered, "everything changes." Kale said nothing, but he did not move away either. That was answer enough. The hood slipped back. The corridor fell silent. Completely. Pale hair spilled loose first, silver blonde beneath the stormlight. Then her face emerged fully from shadow at last. Beautiful enough to stop breath. Not delicate beauty, something rarer, colder. The scar along her throat curved like silver fire against white skin, disappearing beneath the collar of her cloak exactly where Kale had glimpsed it before. And her eyes. God. The entire corridor seemed to dim around them when she finally looked at him directly. Silver blue, luminous. The same impossible eyes painted across the ruined murals deep beneath Blackthorn's citadel. The same eyes carved into ancient tombs sealed for generations. Kale's breath caught softly. Tiny crack. Then the Omega whispered the words that shattered everything left standing between them. "My name is Liriana Vale." A violent silence followed, because every wolf in the Northern Territories knew that name. The lost bloodline, the cursed royal house slaughtered during the Shadow Wars, the family the throne itself had erased from history. And suddenly the raven, the scar, the shadow rot, the hunters crossing borders in the storm, it all fit together at once. Kale stared at her without blinking. Then slowly, impossibly slowly, the Alpha King lowered his head. The corridor remained frozen long after Liriana spoke her name. Wind tore through the shattered cathedral windows, whipping silver strands of hair across her pale face, while rain hissed against the black stone floors. Nobody moved. Not the guards crowding the stairwell below, not Captain Reese standing halfway up the gallery with disbelief written openly across his face. Even the servants had gone silent, because history itself had just stepped out from beneath a hood in the middle of Blackthorn's citadel. Kale still stood before her with his head slightly lowered. Not submission, something heavier. Recognition. The storm outside groaned against the cliffs as if the mountain itself had heard the name Vale spoken again after 2 decades of silence. Behind them, Queen Mother Celine appeared at the end of the corridor, silver robes trailing sharply across the floor. Several council lords followed close behind her, drawn by the commotion spreading through the fortress. The moment Selena saw Liriana's uncovered face, she stopped walking. Tiny crack. Her breath caught almost soundlessly. One of the older lords beside her went visibly pale. "Impossible," he whispered. Another immediately lowered his eyes toward the floor. Not everyone did. Lord Tiberon stepped forward instead, anger rising faster than caution. "This is madness," he snapped. "The Vale bloodline carried shadow rot. They nearly destroyed the Northern Territories." His voice sharpened as more nobles gathered behind him. She should be executed before sunrise. Fear spread instantly through the corridor again. Several guards tightened their grips on their weapons. One servant stumbled backward hard enough to hit the wall. Liriana did not retreat this time. Wind pressed her cloak violently behind her, while the scar along her throat caught silver beneath the dawn light. Tiredness still lingered in her face. So did fear. But beneath both now stood something steadier. She lifted her chin slightly toward the council lord. "Your kings burned children alive in the Shadow Wars," she said quietly. The corridor went dead silent. Tiberon's face drained of color. "Watch your tongue." Or what? The words left her soft, Sharp enough, anyway. Another crack rippled through the watching crowd, because no one spoke to the royal council that way. Not servants, not omegas, certainly not hunted girls dragged from auction blocks. Kael's eyes shifted toward Liriana slowly, and for the first time all night, something almost dangerous flickered beneath the calm he wore so carefully. Not anger at her, pride. Tiburon stepped forward furiously. "Your Majesty, this is exactly why her bloodline was wiped out. They infect everything they touch." Kael moved before the Lord finished speaking. One step, that was all, but the entire corridor changed around it. He placed himself directly between Liriana and the council without looking back once. Protective had become something else now. Final. Enough. His voice rolled through the stone gallery, low and absolute. Tiburon opened his mouth again anyway. Fatal mistake. Kael turned his head slightly toward him, silver eyes cold as winter steel. "You will not threaten her in my citadel." Nobody breathed. Queen Mother Celine watched her son carefully from the end of the corridor, watching the position he had chosen, not beside the throne, beside the girl they once would have burned. Another subtle shift passed through the fortress all at once, invisible, permanent. Guards slowly lowered their weapons first. Then the servants lowered their eyes. One by one, the nobles stepped backward from Liriana instead of toward her. Space opened around her naturally now. Not avoidance anymore. Respect mixed with fear. Even Captain Reese finally bowed his head slightly toward her. Tiny gesture. Huge meaning. Liriana noticed. Her breathing faltered for half a second. The social order of Blackthorn Citadel was rearranging itself in real time around her. Kael extended his hand toward her then, the same hand that had caught her before she fell on the staircase, the same hand she once grabbed in fear beside the chamber wall. Rainwater still glimmered faintly against the black fabric of his sleeve. For one suspended moment, the entire corridor waited. Liriana looked at his hand, then at the nobles staring back at her with transformed faces. No laughter now, no mockery, only silence. Slowly, she placed her hand in his, warm against cold. Kael's fingers closed around hers without hesitation. Somewhere behind them, one of the servants quietly dropped to a knee first, then another, and another. The movement spread down the corridor in waves until even the council lords stood surrounded by kneeling figures beneath the stormlight pouring through broken windows. Nobody ordered it. Nobody dared stop it. Kael never looked away from Liriana as he spoke the words that sealed the fate of every soul inside Blackthorn Citadel. "The girl they sold tonight," he said quietly, "belongs to the throne now."